Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, CJ. You're watching CJ Reads. Haven't done that in months and months and months. Feels good, baby. We're going to be doing a big summer 2022 wrap up. I haven't done a wrap up since May. Partly because I moved, partly because they're my least favorite videos to film. So I think this will be kind of quick because we're covering 4 months of reading. I'm gonna give you quick synopsises and we're gonna do a feels like too. A feels like for each of the books mentioned, which I think is always fun. A lot of time has passed. I haven't really prepared for this video by collecting my thoughts, so I think it's gonna be pretty fresh and real. It's gonna be my memories of the books. Take that for what you will. I guess we'll get into it, right? All right, let's start. So I read Oval by Elvia Wilke. This is a piece of climate fiction. It's a little near future dystopian sci-fi bent where we're essentially following a couple living in an artificial mountain that's at the base of a hill in Berlin. This novel deals with a relationship falling apart, friendship dynamics, navigating this kind of eerie, omnipresent climate anxiety that dictates all of our characters' every move, as well as this kind of surreal take on a medicine that is being manufactured that is supposed to increase empathy and the feeling of giving in human beings. And it's kind of ployed as a party drug at first, but it takes on a more sinister bent, and you kind of see what it means for something that's so altruistic and I guess innate in human beings, like compassion and empathy, to be manufactured and how that plays out on a wider scale. I really enjoyed my time with this book. I'm in a big dystopian bent right now. It's just something that I'm really enjoying in my reading. It's just these kind of like parallel worlds that feel like something to come, something that's a possibility. And this was just what I needed at the time. It's plotty and kind of quick but quirky, and the writing is good and the character development is interesting, and you're not really rooting for anyone, but you don't despise people enough either that you're invested in your reading. I would say this book feels like internalizing the lie and the myth of greenwashing, right? This kind of corporate tactic that consumers are able to see through, but we want to be participating on an individual effort to help contribute in any way we can to ongoing climate issues, but it feels fake and false at the same time. It feels like living in a sphere of gaslighting yourself with greenwashing. Okay, I read Happy Go Lucky by David Sedaris. My friend Sujay sent this to me when I was sick with COVID. Thank you, Sujay, again. I had a weird experience with this Sedaris. One, I was on COVID. I was on the plague, so I can't really speak for what my reading comprehension was like at that time, but David Sedaris had a pretty famously fraught relationship with his father, and his father recently passed in 2021, I believe. And this was the first collection of essays since his father's passing where I feel like Sedaris really was able to speak more plainly about what it felt like being in this very unbalanced relationship with his father, Lou. And that was a new tone from Sedaris, and it was honestly hard to read and felt like he was too close to the subject matter to be writing about it yet. I don't know if that's true or not for him, but it was emotionally volatile, and you really got to see a different side of his father, and he portrayed their formerly like full of quirks and ups and downs relationship for kind of what it truly was, which was this weird power divide. So it was sad. This collection took on a sadder tone than some of the previous Sedarises I've read. It also talked about school shootings and the pandemic a little bit more pointedly, so that was weird. It wasn't my favorite, and I think mostly that was tonally because I was quite literally very ill while I was reading it, and I wanted to be transported someplace that wasn't as realist. This book felt like gritting your teeth through a family dinner because you don't want to stir the pot. So you have to be silent rather than say anything at all. Okay, and then I read Either Or, the new Batuman, a sequel to Miss Celine's first year in Harvard. I enjoyed my time reading this, but now, you know, a few months out from it, I barely remember it at all. For what that's worth, hasn't really stayed with me. It was a fun exploration of our main character Celine's second year of college. Like I said, she gets more interested in philosophy. She has more sexual escapades. She's not nearly as pining as she was for Ivan, which was the majority of the first book. And we get to see her kind of wrestle with this idea throughout the entirety of the book of a moral versus an aesthetic life, which I found interesting. But it hasn't stayed with me at all. So I don't know what that means. I can definitely remember my time with the idiot way more clearly. Either Or feels like when you're in college and you're staying at either a romantic partner or even a friend's house and you're sleeping on the couch and they don't give you a blanket before you go to bed and they don't give you a pillow either, so you kind of just ball your jacket into a misshapen lump and sleep on that on someone's gross couch that has various fluids absorbed in it. It smells a little weird and you're uncomfortable for the entire night. That's what Either Or smells like. Smells like? Feels like. Next I read Heartbroke by, what's that author's name? Chelsea Beaker. I ended up DNFing this book. I read a couple of the short stories and I had a good time with them, but tonally it just wasn't what I was in the mood for at the time. It kind of reminded me of like a more modern Lucia Berlin, and I had just finished reading a Lucia Berlin book probably a month prior, so it just felt kind of same and I had to put it down. I read We Had to Remove This Post, which I didn't really enjoy at all. I found it quite trite. This is about a content moderator who works at this kind of big tech social media company whose sole job is to monitor disturbing social media posts. And the entirety of the book, they're kind of building tension for the narrator to have seen something particularly disturbing at the end, but it never really escalated in that way for me. It's also a queer story. There's a relationship between two women in the middle, and they're kind of fraught, weird, imbalanced power dynamic relationship throughout it. So that's happening, coincided with our narrator just being onslaughted by violent images all day. But it never really materialized for me and didn't get anywhere at the end. This book feels like, someone showing you a video that they tell you is really funny and they're hovering over you watching it, and you're supposed to respond in real time and think it's funny, but you don't, so you're just kind of watching them watch you watch a thing, and everyone's uncomfortable and disappointed. I was reading before I moved A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by freaking George Saunders, and I liked reading this, but I DNF'd it just for the time being. I do think I'm going to come back to it one day, but I was reading it on audio from my library, and my library loan ran out, and it just like wasn't a good, hey, I'm about to move my life across the country vibe. But this is a collection of Russian short stories, and George Saunders kind of breaks down what's working about them, what's not, and kind of interrogating the structure of a short story and how we read them alongside the actual Russian text. So that's interesting. This book I feel like it felt like maybe one of your first more like critical theory classes in college, where you're wanting to please or appease the professor more than you thought you would because you trust them and you like them. So all of a sudden you're transforming into a good student. Yeah, that's what this book feels like. And then I read New Animal for the Sunny's book club. This overall wasn't a successful piece of fiction for me. It is a story about a young 20-something girl, a DWM if you will, who is working at her family's mortuary when her mother unexpectedly dies, and she kind of goes off the rails to avoid dealing with her grief. There's themes of BDSM in it, in parental divides and divorce, the meaning of life, kind of this more zoomed out view of what it means to be in a death industry and to take care of people while they're dead. But overall it felt a little clunky at times and a little bit too twee for me. This book feels like misplaced angst, I would say. Maybe this kind of frustration with life circumstances, and you take it out on the people who love you the most. Felt very of a time to me, of a certain age bracket, maybe late teens, very early 20s. This kind of just like self-destructive behavior that some people put themselves through in order to escape feeling anything. And then I read Matrix by Lauren Groff. I got like 150 pages into this and I DNF'd it. Controversial, I know. This is about a fucking nun who is sent from France to go to like an England nunnery, and she kind of takes over as the lead nun and makes a nunnery that's self-sufficient and protected from men and protected from the government, the royalty powers that be at the time. I thought this was incredibly boring, and the writing itself was like medieval cosplay. Like it was written as if it was in the medieval times. So it was like, you know, just like really medieval language that my brain took way too much processing power to try to compute. I know a lot of people liked this for like strong female characters and this kind of like Rosie the Riveter girl bossery of this lesbian nun, which on paper sounds great to me. I was totally down, but it didn't turn out being as like queer as I thought it could have been. And again, the language was the biggest thing for me to like be unable to break through. I just couldn't get there. This book feels like, honestly, I don't know if this book felt like anything to me because I didn't enjoy it so much. I don't know if I can place it. Maybe gruel. This book felt like gruel to me, not oatmeal, gruel. Next I read Paradise Rot, which is a short, tiny little baby book about a student who takes on a roommate and gets into a housing situation where the roommate themselves and the house are kind of toxic, and that begins to manifest in a very physical way, okay? The roommate is bizarre, is sneaking into the narrator's bed, is kind of obsessive, and the whole book is just like setting up this uncomfortable, pervasive kind of like toxicity personified tone, and we kind of see our narrator have to sit with that. I don't remember how this book ends, and I just read it, which isn't a great sign, and I can't really remember anything except for the language that was like just trying to encapsulate the putridness of both all the characters involved and the home itself. I don't know if I super enjoyed this one, but I don't don't know if I super enjoyed this one, but I'm glad I read it because a lot of other people I know have read it and I wanted to be involved in the conversation. This book feels like peeing your pants. Okay, and then I read Witches, which was an interesting story that also didn't really pay off too much for me. Witches is, in structure, I think maybe this is why it didn't work for me now that I'm looking back on it. It's a book that switches voices and perspectives every other chapter. So we're following two women. One is a reporter who is like in contemporary 2020 times, who has been set to investigate this medicine woman who lives in an indigenous part of Mexico, and then the other half is the Mexican indigenous woman, and it's kind of flashing back and forth between her childhood memories and her path and familial history of being this kind of healer type person in her village. And there are a couple of, this is a weird book to describe. There are a couple of secondary characters as well, besides our two main women, who help form this kind of narrative that's being told as well. One is a trans woman who, the medicine woman, it's her cousin, so it follows her kind of experience being trans in, like, you know, 1950s and on, and the village's mistreatment of her and her access to the indigenous wisdom and medicine that was given to her through her bloodline. And then also there's this queer sister of our modern investigator person, and we kind of follow her artistic journey and just path against her path and all of the resistance that she meets for being a queer woman as well. So it kind of showed these, like, you know, different sides of Mexican and indigenous culture being in these queer identities, and this passage of time and how things have stayed the same and how they're different in different ways as well. And I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed both of these characters, but I don't remember how this book ends either, which also isn't a great sign. And as much as I enjoyed my reading experience of it, if it didn't stay with me, I don't know really what that means. This book felt like going to a dinner party and there's someone who you can tell their lived experience has just been like completely full, and you want to find out more about them, so you're just kind of like entranced listening to their story. Okay, and then I read Signs Preceding the End of the World, which is a tiny short novella again, and it is, wow, I can't really remember this book either, that's crazy. It is I think it's kind of like a surrealist ghost story that is an allegory for crossing the border, and the journey emotionally and physically that entails, and the characters that you meet along the way. I need to reread this because I rated it like 4 or 5 stars, so I really enjoyed my time with it, but I think it was just in a period of brain fog where I didn't retain any of it. So that's not great, but I will read it again. And then I read Dogs of Summer, which is the Sunny's Book Club pick for September, which is very exciting. I really loved this book. Dogs of Summer follows 2 girls in the Canary Islands in Spain, and it's kind of in the early aughts, and it shows their violent and volatile relationship with one another, their very unbalanced power dynamics that are at play, their budding sexuality and sexualization of not only each other, but from the boys and peers they're interacting with, what poverty feels like for these working class girls. It's narrated from child narrators, which is usually not my favorite thing at all, but it's done so well. This was a really striking, hard, disgusting book to read, and I loved it. It reminds me of Ferrante. It reminds me of the Florida Project. If any of those things sound good to you, this kind of like dark childhood unveiled, I really think you should give it a chance. One of my favorite books of this year so far. This book feels like entering into a chat room on AIM and cybering with probably a grown man on the other end. You know, it's that uncomfortable. It gets there. It really unveils kind of this unspoken, what it meant to have access to the internet, and also just like be an unsupervised tween. Next up, I read Bad Thoughts. This was a short story collection that I DNF'd. I didn't like the tone. It was given like Los Angeles millennial, which I just wasn't in the vibe for at the time. Let me know if you've read it though and you liked it. Then I read White on White, which was a great little novel about art and obsession and the stories we tell ourselves. It again reminded me of Ferrante and maybe more like The Days of Abandonment and The Lost Daughter Ferrante. It was just like a rich characterization of academics and artists and the narratives we tell ourselves and we want others to believe about us. Interesting book, interesting book. This felt like when you're in a conversation with someone and they offer absolutely no line of questioning for you to contribute anything about yourself, right? So the entirety of the conversation is driven by their need to keep repeating some kind of narrative or story about themselves. There's no room for you to share any of your experience or yourself. They just want to talk about themselves. That unloading, that's what this book feels like. Then I read In the Distance, which was a great modern Western that, though modern in tone, was set in a historical period. It follows a Swedish immigrant who is kind of abandoned in America and has to make their way through a desert landscape in hopes of finding their brother, and kind of gets mythified and establishes this kind of cult legendary status along the way. Our protagonist Hawk is an incredibly interesting guy to follow. I felt so bad for him throughout the entirety of this book. I was like, damn Hawk, we're in this situation again. That guy just could not keep himself out of trouble. He was like a sex slave by some creepy woman when he was a teenager, and then he was like on a naturalist journey and left in the middle of the desert to die, and then he had to become some guy's bodyguard and like protect them from the covered wagon scene. It was crazy. A lot happens in this book and I think you should read it. This book feels like if a Western, if you're at your grandparents' house and they're watching a Western, which happened to me like every Sunday of my entire life growing up in Florida. We would go to my grandparents' house and my grandpa was watching Westerns every single Sunday. Incredibly boring. I hated that. It was like always a John Wayne Western that you just had no interest in because they all were the same movie over and over again. So it's like that, but if what was on TV was actually good, right? If you're actually invested in the character and you want to see what happens to him next. That's what I felt like. Then I read This Could All Be Different, a debut novel. This follows a young Indian woman who is an immigrant who is working in this more corporate job, trying to establish herself in a new city, dealing with her burgeoning sexuality as a queer woman, dealing with her status of an immigrant daughter who has to provide for her family and send money back home, and this kind of culture in and outness that she's experiencing on a daily basis of, you know, what her means actually are, what her reality is, versus the posturing she wants to show to her friends and to herself about what it means to live in America. This book was super captivating and you get really invested in our narrator and the friends she makes and her journey along the way. I think maybe at times it got a little too twee and like sentimental and corny for me. This whole like found family narrative, she really leans on her friends in America. She has a hard time leaning on them at first. It just all felt a little labored to me. So it wasn't entirely successful, but I think a lot of people will like this book because it does have a lot of good things going on. But felt like a debut to me, and I'm excited to see what this author does next, but won't be on my favorites list, that's for sure. I would say it feels like when you're out to your early 20s, right? You're out to eat with your friends and everyone is ordering with seemingly no regard to what the final price is going to be, and then you get to the end of the meal and it's time to pay for it, and instead of people buying what they ordered, they say, let's all split the bill. And normally that's fine and dandy, but you ordered a salad because you couldn't afford to be there, really. And so now you're stuck in this like uncomfortable social predicament where you don't know what the move is here. And now you're stuck questioning other people's financial abilities while being disappointed in yourself that you're not able to just split it with them and keep up with the Joneses. Then I read Death by Landscape, which is an essay collection by Elvia Wilke, who started this conversation and video with her book Oval. This was an interesting collection of essays that deals with the environment, nature writing, sci-fi, genre fiction, vampire LARPing, role-playing, the meaning of art as a political tool. What good is art as a political tool? Interrogating a novel structure and how it can be reinterpreted many times over. I loved this collection of essay. I have a whole video about it from our book club discussion. It is super weird and big brains, and I can't say that all of it washed over me or sunk in completely, but it is something that I think I will come back to in time because the subject matter is that rich and interconnected and nuanced. This book felt like when you get to like an author's note at an end of a collection, essay collection, or a bibliography, and there's like a footnote period and you just kind of want to like spend more time in that appendix glossary because you need to absorb more of the knowledge of the text that just passed through you. Does that make sense? Like you read the thing, you digested the thing, and then there's the appendix part of the reading experience, and you hang out there for as long as you did the first part of reading the actual text itself. Kind of like a crossword or a search puzzle for connecting more dots. Intertextual play, let's say that. And then I just finished Gold Fame Citrus by Claire Bay Watkins. Claire Bay Watkins is officially in my favorite authors list. This is a story about a woman named Luz who is kind of a child star who is living in a near future Los Angeles where people have completely fled the area because it's inhospitable. There's no water, there's no food, there's no government resources for people, but there's some last burnouts trying to hold on to this kind of quintessential California energy. Eventually she has to break away from that. She, along the way with her partner Ray, finds this child that has been neglected and needs parents, so they steal her pretty much. She makes her way to something that they call the Dune Sea, which is a environmental catastrophe, which is essentially the size of an ocean, but it's made up of sand and it kind of is overtaking the West. And alongside that Dune Sea, she finds a community of other burnouts who refuse to leave. In this community, there's kind of like a cult hierarchy and structure going on. They're kind of all following this man who has the ability to find water. So people are growing food in this desert community. They always have access to fresh water, and alongside that kind of weird relationship dynamic of all of these vagabonds who are indebted to this one guy who can find water. She gets mixed up and things go from there. That's all I'll say. I really liked this book. It was so fun, so beautifully written, and again, it was scratching my climate fiction dystopian itch. This book felt like a 120-degree day, sand whipping at your face, and an insatiable thirst. And also just this kind of posturing and different personality play that seems tempting at times. Like this whole question of like, who would I be if X didn't happen? Who would I be if I did Y instead? That kind of ethos of just this constant questioning of the different paths your lives could have taken if only you were a different person, right? So that's what I read in the summer of 2022. Kind of an interesting reading season. I am feeling settled in Arizona now, and I feel like my reading is on the uptick, so that's all good things. I wouldn't say this is my best reading year so far, guys. 2020 is not really doing it for me, but we're trying anyway. Okay. Love you. Bye.